everybody. My name is Ben. I don't have my name tag because it kept flipping like this and driving me crazy. So I apologize for that, but it's easy to remember. One of the pastors here. It's good to be with you today as we wrap up what we started 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago called Life's Too Short. Before I get into it, on the Life Desk, every time we do a sermon series, there's study guides that go along with it, and there's still just a couple more for this series, and you can pick that up on your way out. If you've missed a couple weeks, go online and check those out. If you're a digital person, all of this is on the website. In fact, there's probably some people online right now watching also. You can find all of this there. And then next week, we're going to start something new called All In. But I'll wrap up Life's Too Short this way. 2 weeks ago, we started and we talked about how life is too short to live with shame all the time, to let it define your life. Last week, about how life is too short to work all the time. There's this tension in life between working and doing what God has given you to do and resting and abide. We used abound and abide back and forth. And today, I want to talk about how life is too short to play it safe. Now, to kind of give you this imagery first, I want to tell you about some things in your life that are dangerous. In your house, in fact, there are things that are dangerous. There's a man by the name of Larry Loden. He's a professor at the University of Hawaii. He wrote a book a while back about risk and about the risks that we take. And in one of his chapters, he talks about household risks and some of the most dangerous things in your house. And some you might imagine. For instance, every year in the United States, about 460,000 people are injured with kitchen knives. Anybody one of those statistics? Yeah. About 100,000 people every year are injured in one way or another with either hand saws or power saws. Those things make sense. Don't make sense as much. For instance, how many of you have draperies in your home or curtains? So I think, are they draperies when they have the cords, then you pull them and they open and they close? About 20 people a year are injured with drapery cords. And that's not the funniest one. Here, check this out. I'm going to read a quote right from his book. He says, annually, some 4,000 of us seriously injure ourselves. Not just kind of injure ourselves, but seriously injure ourselves on pillows. Yeah, right? How does that happen? Pillows. Maybe it's pillow fights. I'm not sure, but 4,000 with pillows. Now that I've kind of set that stage, think about your own house and think about what is one of the most dangerous things in your house. And I'm going to tell you what I think one of the most dangerous things in any one of our houses is, and it's right here. It's this. What is this? It goes by a few different names and different styles depending on your design expertise. But this is a reclining chair, or as we've been calling them for a long time, easy chairs. You heard that phrase? You know, people get these chairs not because they make the room look great. You know, I don't know any designer that's like, oh, you know, it'd be great in that corner. That would be a recliner. And one of those big stuffy ones. You know what I'm talking about? But we get these chairs because they're comfortable, right? You could sleep in it. Yeah, like today when the Chiefs play and I get bored, I'm just going to kick back and I'm going to nap. And we like these easy chairs because we can sit here and it's all about comfort. And if you got it just right, you got your table with your cold drink and the remote control and your phone. Unless you're like me and you kind of have this, you kind of like rest your phone right there. You know what I'm talking about? And you sit back and you take it easy. I would tell you that this is one of the most dangerous objects in your house. Not because of what happens when you're in the chair, but because of what doesn't happen when you're in the chair. You see where I'm going? The easy chair, the recliner, the easy way out is one of the most dangerous things in life. We were meant to do something so much more than to follow comfort. Here's the thing. God has so much more in store for us in this life. It is too short to just play it safe. to be comfortable. Take it easy all the time. And I want you to know, what I'm not saying about life's too short to get safe is I'm not saying life's too short so you need to go be impulsive and you need to go do stupid things. And we'll do stupid things on our own, right? This is natural. I'm speaking to the guys in the room. Ladies, you never do stupid things. I'm not saying that you've got to go out and risk your life all the time and do impulsive things, but life is too short for us to take this ordinary life that God has given us and not do anything with it. We were created to be in a partnership with God, to do great things into this world. In fact, as we pray in the Lord's Prayer, is to make your kingdom come here on earth as it should be in heaven. And to do so, you've got to get out of the easy chair. You see, the Bible has this on and on conversation throughout all of its pages of people that have encountered God and gone and done something in this world wasn't comfortable. We call these God calling people to do something. We call it a call story or a call narrative. If you've been in church a long time, you might hear somebody saying, I feel called to do something, right? We don't really talk in those terms otherwise, but we're going to talk about call stories today because you may be feeling God calling you to do something, and I want you to realize that there's something common in all of them, all the way back to the very beginning of time. The call is what we call it, is the initial part of what happens, and this is where God, hey, maybe audibly or just this feeling or realization that I want you to do something, and I want you to know that God calls people to do something all the time, and all the time he does it, it is easy and it is a piece of cake and it never costs you anything. Okay, that was a lie. All the time through the Bible, when you read it, God interrupts somebody. And he never says, hey, I want you to do this, and it will require nothing. Oh, it's the exact opposite. I call you to do something, and it's going to cost you something. For instance, there's this whole chapter in the Bible, in your New Testament, the book of Hebrews, chapter 11. It tells story after story after story of how God interrupted the lives of regular people and called them to do something, and they stepped out in faith to do it. For instance, Abraham and Sarah, it's like right from the beginning. He comes to Abraham, and he comes to Sarah, and he says, I want you to leave your hometown. I know you were born and raised in Junction, but I want you to pack yourself up. I'm going to make you travel somewhere that you don't know where you're going right now. And I'm going to create a whole new nation around you, a whole new people. And I know you don't have children, but trust me, will. And it will happen in your 90s. Does that sound easy? Moses is another one we talk about in church quite a bit. God called him. He was basically living a comfortable life at the time. I mean, as comfortable as you can as a shepherd. It was something that he knew. I mean, he had a good family around him. And God says, Moses, I want you to go back to Egypt, which is the place, by the way, that you are wanted because you murdered somebody. And I want you to go back there, and I want you to defy the Pharaoh, who is the king or the president, if you want to use a modern language. I want you to defy them and tell them to let my people go. Easy, right? And time after time, God calls people, and they have to say yes to God or say no. And in this book, it talks about all these different people. You'll hear names like Gideon and Barak and Samson and Samuel, all these other names. And when they finally said yes and they followed God, followed Jesus in the New Testament, things happened to them, some weird things. Things like this. It said some faced jeers and flogging, while still others were chained and they were put in prison. They were stoned, but not in our modern language of stone. They were about beat to death with rocks. They were sawn in two. That sounds like fun. They were put to death by the sword. Skins. They were destitute. They were persecuted and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them, it says. They wandered in the deserts and the mountains and in the caves and the holes in the ground. So listen, after reading words like this, how high of a value do you think God places on leading you to someplace comfortable? I know that doesn't sound like good news, right? The God of the Bible is very concerned about us. It says that he loves us and he wants to be in connection with us. He wants us to grow. He wants us to be strong. He wants us to live with him in such a way that we radiate out of God. At the same time, the God of the Scriptures is also not particularly worried about whether or not we are comfortable or that we have easy chairs in life. So we have to realize this because often, maybe because we just want to sound nice, we say things like, you know what, if you just give your life to Jesus, everything will be okay. And the reality is exact opposite might be true. Well, sometimes we call it the good news of Jesus Christ. Sometimes the good news sounds a little bit like bad news. Following Jesus is not comfortable. It'll cost you something. So the first thing in all of these encounters is God calls people. And maybe you felt that or you've heard that to something. But he calls people, and then the next part of all these stories and your story is there has to be a response. Right? Every question out there, there's a response. Unless it's a rhetorical question. And gentlemen, if your wife asks you a question, it is not rhetorical. It requires a response. And if you don't respond, it's a response, right? Yeah. But you have to say yes or you have to say no. There's a response. When God gives somebody a hard assignment, how often does he come to them again and say, hey, you know, I want you to defy Pharaoh, and I want you to take, I want you to be in the lion's den, or listen, I want birth to a Messiah, or I want you to marry this woman who swears she's a virgin and yet she's pregnant. And if you had God say that, no. He's asking you. Here's the thing, in all these stories, when you read them in the Bible, when God asks people to do stuff, there's a common response as well. And most often it's no, or please no, or heck no, or dude, you got the wrong number. That's the most common thing, and often it's because people are afraid, and you may be afraid as well. Sometimes people feel fear because they feel like they're inadequate, or maybe fear because they're going to lose something, or it's going to cost them something, or fear because you might fail. Listen, people, I want you to know that if God has put a nudge in you and is calling you to do something, don't worry about being afraid of being inadequate or not smart enough, because when God calls you, he's already taken into account all the dumb things you've already done. That gives me a lot of confidence because I've done a mountain of them. But people respond mostly with fear. It's biblical, by the way. If you take Moses, for example, God chooses Moses to go back into Egypt to defy Pharaoh. And when he tells Moses that this is what he wants him to do, Moses tells God no. And he doesn't just do it once or twice. He does it 5 times. And when he does it, he has legitimately good excuses. Well, you know, I can't speak very well. I'm not a public speaker. You should find somebody else. Or they want to kill me, right? 5 times. Often we might think, well, maybe God's never going to ask me to do something that scares me. But listen, the opposite. Or God, here's what we've said before. God's never going to give me that I can handle. Well, that's... Because God is always going to give you stuff that you can't handle on your own. But you have to respond. I think there's a challenge for all of us in front of us. There's this course of action, this road that we have to walk down that's going to cause us to grow in some way, to use part of ourselves to bless other people. And do it, you're going to be scared. But listen, be careful of saying no. Because if the only reason you're saying no is because you're afraid, then maybe you should realize that fear is because God is actually in the midst of this. And on the converse, I'm going to go here. If there's things in life and you haven't felt challenged in quite some time and everything is easy and you have had like seasons of easy chair living in life, then maybe, just maybe, God isn't in much of what you're doing. God wants you to say yes. Even in the midst of your fear. There's a lot. Feel the fear, but do it anyway. So he calls people, and they have to respond. And in the midst of all this, there's another element to all of these call stories, and that is a promise that God gives. And it's a promise, like for instance, in Joshua, he says this to the people. He says, listen, I want you to be strong and courageous, to not be terrified, do not be discouraged. And here's the promise. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. I mean, that line right there, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Be courageous. That is like tattoo worthy, or that is like something that you hang on your mirror or in your car so that you remember everywhere you go. When God calls you to do something, he says to be courageous, to not be afraid, because I will be there wherever you go. And this doesn't mean that if you follow God, that nothing bad's ever going to happen to you. In fact, The Apostle Paul, he said yes to Jesus. And because of him, we're here. In fact, we named our church after him because he's that kind of a guy. He traveled all over the known world planting churches. He said yes, and yet he was imprisoned, and he was beaten, and he was publicly humiliated. And he was even humiliated by church people. I mean, go figure. Listen, the promise from God over and over when you say yes is that nothing can separate you from the love that I have, and I will be with you through the midst of it. So God, he calls somebody, and inevitably when he does, they feel inadequate or they're scared. But maybe they say yes, and God makes this promise that I'll always be there. And this other component finally is the actual decision to make, where you take that step forward. Because I use the word decision, but I'm using it in an action, is what I'm trying to describe. A long time ago, I was told a story. There's 3 frogs sitting on a log, and the one on the end decided to jump. How many are on the log? There's 3, because they haven't actually jumped yet. This is the decision of jumping. That has to happen where you say yes or you say no. And every time you do it, you're going to feel inadequate. But I got to tell you, when you jump into it, all of a sudden you're going to feel alive. And you're going to feel like it's something that you were created to do. Have you ever really felt alive? When I was younger, one of the things that made me feel the most alive was snow skiing. I haven't done it since I was about 35. Because of back surgeries. And for some reason, my skeleton doesn't like to do it anymore. And they tell you mind over matter, right? You can just will yourself into it. I can't anymore. But at the time, man, I'd love it because we would travel to wherever, New Mexico, Colorado. You get into the mountains, you get on the lift, you go up to the top, the wind's blowing, it is freezing cold, and it's just you and the elements, and your heart pumping, right? And you are terrified, and yet you do it. Man, I remember skiing, feeling like, wow. Now that I'm a little more broke down, one of the things that does it for me is zip lining. Anybody ever zip line? Yeah. There's this one in Branson that you can go on, and you get up into the trees, and you zip line from one platform to the other, then you get on, and then you go to another platform to the other platform to the other, and it ends at this 5 or 6 story tall tower. And at this tower, there's no staircase, or there's no ladder. All they do is they take this rope with a hook on it, and they latch it to the harness that's on your back, and you have to step off this platform and fall and change your shorts when you get to the bottom. I was terrified to do that, but there was something in me saying, I got to try it. And then we were up there, and these teenage girls were up there, and they're like, sweet, and they just jumped right off that thing, and I was going to let them show me up. So they latched it on. I stepped up to the edge, shaking, and I stepped off, and man, when I hit the ground, when I landed on the ground, and I felt alive. When you say yes to God, it makes you feel alive. But let me ask you this. When he's asking you to do something, it's going to cost you. There's going to be some risk. Maybe for you, what you're feeling is to say yes is going to involve some relational risk. What I mean by that is you're going to have to open up to somebody, or you have to tell them truth, and you're scared. Maybe God is calling you to a new vocation and work. And there's going to be some risk involved, and you're going to lose some things, and to do it is frightening. Or maybe God is talking to you about money right now, but you've been saving up your whole life for the next greatest ease of life. You know, the bigger one, the overstuffed one with the massage unit and the heating unit and the cup holders and the nacho dispenser and the USB port. By the way, if they can make a nacho dispenser in a chair, God bless them. But you've been saving up your whole life for it, and to say yes to God with something around money is terrifying. And it's scary. And maybe you got to let go. Maybe God's asking you to explore a whole area where he has gifted you with a talent or a heart for something, and yet you've been holding back, thinking that maybe somebody else will take care of it. Or maybe there's a sin in your life, a secret sin. And you know what I'm talking about. Because I said secret sin makes you go a little bit. And And you know that to confront it, you got to be open up, and you got to talk to somebody. You got to be vulnerable. And the challenge for you is, will you leave this place, and will you do that? You see, it takes an act of courage to say yes. For some of you, it's just to say yes to God because you've been searching, and you're unsure, and yet you feel something. You feel the grace of God do it, and yet you don't have all the answers, and you've got some hesitation. And listen, just say yes. Figure that out. Say yes. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to read the scriptures, and I'm going to get to know people, and maybe get in a life group so you can understand this whole faith thing a little bit more. Say yes. Or maybe to say yes to God right now is to just stop and to rest and to abide, because you've been working and working and working and working so much and so hard that you're at the end of your rope. Maybe you're going through deep loss or pain. Saying yes is just saying, God, I'm going to hold on to you. I don't know when this will end, but I won't give up. Say yes. Where is God asking you to get out of this chair? To say yes. Because every time somebody gets out, the most important thing happens in all these stories. That is this: a changed life happens, or changed lives. Every story of a call from God ends up being the story of a changed life, or every time somebody says yes, the world changes in some way. Listen, after Jesus called his disciples, he called these guys, like Peter and John. And after Jesus died and resurrected, they were there. They were out telling about Jesus because they didn't know what else to do. They wouldn't shut up about it, which irritated the leaders in that area. And they would try to intimidate them. And this is what they were saying about Peter and John in the book of Acts. It says, when they is the religious leaders, the pastors, the politicians, the ones with power. It says, when they saw the courage of Peter and John, and they realized that they were unschooled, they were ordinary men, they were astonished, and they took note that these men had been with Jesus. Meaning, they had no status, they had no title, they weren't married into a very wealthy family. All of these things, they were just, as Joe Walsh would sing, ordinary average guy. And so the men of power would notice that these ordinary average guys were bold, that they were courageous, they would talk all the time about Jesus, and what they put one and one together to get two is they realized that it was the Jesus that changed these men, that made them more than anything else they could ever be. But here's the thing, you need to also know that sometimes in scriptures, people say no. There's a story where somebody comes to Jesus, Jesus, what does it take to be your disciple, to follow you? And in that particular story, Jesus says, I want you to sell everything and follow me. And the guy's like, I just can't do that. They know sometimes. Why? Because to say no is, I've got really comfortable here. This chair, this life of mine, I have masterfully made it, and I'm comfortable, and it just fits me just right. That's what happens when we say no. And when we say no to God and we choose comfort instead, what happens is our souls get a little bit colder. And our hearts get a little bit smaller. And our spirits start to die. And I know it's true because I've been there. Life is too short to be there. On the day you entered this world, people celebrated and laughed and they cried tears of joy because you were just so awesome. They would know you would grow up to be not as awesome, but you could still be awesome. And on the day that you die, people are going to come, they're going to celebrate your life because you were awesome. And they're going to cry tears of sorrow. It's going to happen. It might be today or tomorrow or hopefully way past today. But the reality is, there's a day that you were born and a day that you die, and what matters is in between. And no matter if it's weeks or days, is too short to play it safe. Life's too short to not take some risks, to not try some things with God. Life's too short to live like that. Let's pray. God, I simply ask, whatever you have stirred within us, whatever that next step is, that you give us the courage and the boldness to get out of the easy chair of life and say yes. God, for the person right now that needs the courage to step up and say something to somebody that's difficult, I pray that you give them the power. God, for the one that needs to sit down to get rid of a sin that continually hampers them, I pray that you give them the strength to give it to you. God, for the one who is feeling that nudge to maybe make a drastic change in their life, I pray that you give them the courage and surround them with the people to do it. And God, for the one who today says, God, I feel you, and I think the first step is just yes. I pray that you help them say that today. Yes, God. So Lord, come and change us in the power of your Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thanks, Pastor Ben.